Tuesday, October 17, Day 11. That day was to be a scenic cruise through the Wachau Valley. It's a narrow stretch of the Danube Valley around 80 kilometres west of Vienna. The town of Melk is at the lower end of the valley, and the town of Krems at its upper end. Melk is the site of Melk Abbey, an imposing 900-year-old Benedictine Abbey. It's a stunning example of Baroque architecture overlooking the town from its dramatic hilltop outcrop. In the 11th century, the buildings, originally a royal palace, were presented to the Benedictine monks, who promptly fortified it as their abbey. From the coach park, we descended the elaborate steps towards the entry to the grounds. The abbey is vast, and its meticulously kept grounds are inviting and picturesque. Black-robed Benedictine monks still stroll amongst the marble sculptures and frescoed walls. It's also a prestigious monastery school with more than 700 students. The views from its extensive balconies are stunning. Its magnificent library houses marvellous frescoes and many thousands of priceless medieval manuscripts. Photography was banned. We were then left to make our own way back to the ship by way of the main street and town square, immediately below the abbey. Once again, I was forced to ask myself, where are all the people? Ah, there's one. After lunch on board, we settled back for a scenic cruise towards Krems. As well as being a remarkably preserved medieval landscape that includes picturesque villages and hilltop castles, the Wachau Valley has an unparalleled reputation for producing the finest white wines in Central Europe, predominantly Riesling and Gruner Veltliner varieties. The Celts were first to recognise the potential of the soil and climate in the valley, and wine has been produced there since that time, long before the Roman Empire introduced the Riesling grape. Despite the magic in the soil, growing grapes there is a challenging endeavour. In order to use the steep slopes, narrow terraces were constructed using dry stone walls, a characteristic of the Wachau landscape. Most of these terraces are still in use today, but growing there demands a great deal of manual labour by many independent wine growers. I would sample the fruits of their labours later that day. Dürnstein was first mentioned in 1192, when King Richard I of England, Richard the Lionheart, was held captive in the castle above the town by Leopold V, Duke of Austria, after their dispute during the Third Crusade. It is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the Wachau region. Later that afternoon, the ship stopped at Krems to let off passengers. Some would stroll around the town, whilst others, those with an interest in sampling Austria's famed white wines, would take a scenic 15-minute drive into the valley to visit a local winery. Four generations of a family run the business that we visited. Erhard, the owner, was quite a character. To him, the tasting session was more about sampling his own wine and having fun than presenting a serious assessment of their wines. Conversely, our guide made a serious attempt to educate us.
Historic cellars, you cannot work as hygienically as you need to in today's winemaking. This particular little cellar was built by Erhard and his dad one very drunken week in 1989. They said they had to drink enough to make this really incredible. When they finished it, they took some of the best whites of each year and stored them back here. And some of them you can still see with us, those old dusty bottles with the years below them, 90, 91, 94. The neat part about those is those were the first wines that Erhard made on his own.
Malachite is actually the German word for malachite, semi-precious stone. So Erhard chose that name for his top line of wines. Sort of the same way malachite is better than your average rock. Those wines are cut about the same. Now, they're not the same. It's different for each malachite wine. But I'll explain it to you with just this one, okay? First of all, any malachite wine, you're only using about a third of the grapes that are on the vine. You're cutting off the first third shortly after it was. The second third...
After the serious wine tasting was done, we made our way outside to sample some of their distilled products. I don't recall much about their wines, but it was certainly a fun evening. Having experienced Austrian Gemütlichkeit, we boarded the coach to travel back to the ship for dinner. A little more ebullient than the outbound journey. Wednesday, October 18, Day 12. We would spend that day in the Big Smoke, Vienna. The historic centre is rich in architectural ensembles, including Baroque palaces and gardens. So our expectations of the day's excursion were high. It was called Panoramic Vienna, a half-day coach and walking tour. Initially, we were driven past various landmarks to get a feel for the city, mostly centred upon government or public buildings with grand but otherwise unremarkable facades. It is the cultural, economic and political centre of the country, and the most populous of the cities on the Danube River. Having become used to the apparent lack of people in the towns we had visited so far, Vienna caught us off guard. It has vast collections of cultural and artistic treasures, museums in every possible category, and prodigious history. But there's only so much that can be experienced in the half day allocated to us. The Hofburg, for example, was the former principal imperial palace and seat of power of the Habsburg dynasty in Austria. It's one of the largest palace complexes in the world, today a hotspot for museums, politics and events. We briefly stopped in front to note the balcony where, in 1938, Hitler delivered his notorious ceremonial speech proclaiming the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany. And then we were hustled through inner courtyards of the complex without fully understanding where we were going or what we were seeing.
It's so beautiful that nobody ever dared to change it. This liquid
Our brief tour of the Hofburg complex ended here. I didn't understand what the attraction was, why so many people were crowding into such a small space. And then I heard someone mention horses. We were, apparently, about to gaze upon the stables of the Spanish riding school, part of the Hofburg complex. There was clearly nothing happening at the time, but that didn't stop the crowds from jostling for position, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famed Lipizzanas. This was the only glimpse we achieved.
Which means how to behave like in front of a job interview, how to tie a tie, how to have a firm handshake, and all of these very basic.
We then just cruised the city back streets and laneways, absorbing the ambience of the capital. It has been called the City of Music due to its musical legacy, given that all the big-name classical musicians lived and worked here. On our brief tour, we got no appreciation of this legacy, but we were looking forward to an optional excursion we had chosen for that evening, a Mozart and Strauss concert. As we made our way back to our coaches, we concluded that Vienna was a place where you would need to stay a while to fully explore and appreciate the vast treasures within.